Recording. Week 3, Lecture 1, Drama of Antiquity. And it's working. Yes. Put that in my pocket. And I have notes that I want to be able to refer to. So, one of the reasons I chose this as our meeting point was because the view of the Theater of Marcellus, and the theater, of course, the portion of it that exists of the archways, later built over. Okay. Now, the theater. What are elements of the theater that you can think of? Or drama, if you want to put it that way. You have the physical space. In this case, a freestanding theater. Does it have to be a building? Where else can it take place, do you think? In a courtyard, sure. You could also have an ancient Rome. They had temporary theaters. They built them sometimes from wood. They could take place. It could really take place anywhere. Think of also periods of history when you have a wagon coming through. People, making a performance from the back of a wagon, right? But why is it a performance? And what are the origins of this? Why does it occur at all? Why do we have drama, right? Well, the fundamental element would be the actor, right? And now what is an actor? And what is an actor in ancient Rome? We got to go back to a religious idea, an idea of a religious act, right? Before the actor, you have what's called the chorus. Just think of the word chorus, C-H-O-R-U-S, the chorus. And before the theater, like drama as we think of it, a play or something, you have the enacting of ceremonies. You have the enactment of rites. And when I say rite, it's R-I-T-E-S. A rite is an action that could be a religious rite, meaning a ceremonial action. For example, the Mass, where they raise up the host, that's a religious rite, right? It's an action. And a sacrifice of an animal, that would be a religious. That's a religious rite as well. Okay, so you have. Let's go back to the really primeval period, ancient Greece, and this is even before the Greece that we think of in their sophistication with temples and so on. Archaic is a good word for it. Archaic is an important word. It comes up a lot in this early period. It's spelled A-R-C-H-A-I-C, archaic. So the Archaic period, the Bronze Age, that's the 14th, 13th century BC. So this is way before even the Golden Age of Greece. Think of what's considered the Dark Ages of Greece is something like the 10th century BC. Right? So we're talking a long time ago. But these religious ceremonies, religious rites, they could take place in a sacred grove. A sacred grove. Remember, we've mentioned in the past about where temples come from. What is the idea of a column? What do columns represent? A column, it's long and round and tall. What does it represent? What does it become a stand-in for? Imagine a sacred grove in a wood. Trees, exactly. You have a sacred grove, a sacred little wood where there are considered to be, what is the name of the spirits that we've mentioned? The Numen. Yeah, let's say so you have a sacred grove where there are considered to be Numen. These Numen take on personalities such as ultimately something like Diana of the wood, Diana, the goddess, right? Goddess of the hunt and other things. And that sacred wood with its tall trees, ultimately that becomes, you could say, a temple. And a temple with that covered sacred area that's defined, circumscribed with the columns, right? So you see there's an evolution there. So you go from a very early archaic period with a sacred magical grove, with for example, the lake of Nemi, which is outside of Rome, considered the mirror of the gods, this little lake, right? And then the sacred place in it. And then ultimately we come to temples and so on. And the chorus, which could be a group of adepts, a group of religious followers or priests, they're enacting the ceremony, right? And of course, there could be singing. So already you see there are elements of what we consider to be acting in the theater, all the way down to our own time. There's singing, there's dancing, there's chanting, right? There's an enactment of a ritual. The Comédie Française, which is the famous, founded in the 1600s, it still functions, the famous theater of Paris. It starts with a guy coming out with a big stick and he hits the ground, boom, 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 boom. That's part of the ritual, right? There's a ritual there. And these rituals can have, of course, a religious significance. So I hope I'm making it clear to you that these connections, these spiritual connections, right? And now think of it. When over time those choruses, those groups that are chanting, what emerges out of that but an individual who might take on a more important role, and that individual, who could be a priest in that context, will ultimately become who are the individuals in the theater? What do we call them? Actors, right? Now think about it to our own day. Any movie that you see or any performance that you see, the actor is pretending to be something that he's not. He's being inhabited by another personality. So even if it's Tom Cruise, he's not playing Tom Cruise, right? I mean, of course, he has his attributes, his unique physique and voice and physical embodiment of his being, but he's pretending to be the spy or whatever it is, right? He's literally, you could say, being possessed. I mean, there's a religious aspect, if you think about it, to any kind of acting. And any actor, any artist of any kind will tell you about the zone. I mean, everybody experiences it, hopefully, at some point in their life or their career or whatever they do that really, where they're literally ecstatic, they're enthused. You know what enthused comes from? The Greek literally being inhabited by the spirits. You know, you're enthused, you're filled with inspiration. Right? It's a connection to God. It's coming into you and acting through you. Think of those, you know, the greatest musicians who are performing, and it's just flowing through them, right? So what is it that's flowing through them? It's not just their hours of practice or, like I said, their physical manifestation, but it's something else. It's inspiration, literally something entering them. So that spiritual idea we see in the arts, and by arts, I mean, we certainly don't have to mean what we consider the arts. I mean, if it's an engineer sitting at his work table who's completely engrossed in what he loves doing and he's being productive and he's just in the zone, there's no question in my mind that that's art, and it's true for somebody building a house or anything. I mean, the nobility of art, I believe, is in human endeavor. It doesn't matter what it is specifically, right? So I hope that makes clear this idea, you know, again, connecting from what was religious rituals in these archaic times and the chorus and the priests emerging from the group as individuals, and the idea of them functioning, and this is especially important, functioning as it's a simple idea, but the word, I don't have quite the right word. Functioning as a bridge, that individual being a bridge between the celestial, the spiritual, and the world, and the human, or rather the physical reality. So the priest, you could say, is doing that. The actor is doing that. The priest that becomes an actor through these kinds of ceremonies, they are functioning as a connection from something celestial, something spiritual, something magical to our world, right? And think of, for example, the Catholic Mass. If you know, whether you're Catholic or not, you should walk into any number of churches during your time in Rome and observe the Mass and observe what the priest is doing when he's at that high altar and he's holding his hands up in the air like this. Why is he doing that? He's receiving the Holy Spirit. and he's doing it for the believers. He's receiving the Holy Spirit, and it's being transmitted into the host. The host is the bread, it's the body of God, and it now has taken on this magical property, right? So he's functioning as a transition, as a bridge between the spiritual and the physical world, right? So all these overlapping ideas of the ecstatic religion, of ancient archaic religions, and acting comes out of that, right? So in ancient Greece, you have the evolution towards the structure that we consider theater, which would be where there's a story that's enacted, actors that are inhabiting characters. So now we're in the world of proper theater, capital T theater. But what I've tried to do is give you an illustration of some of that, archaic goo that it came out of, right? Which is beyond history, really. I mean, this is speculation, but it's reasonable, I think. Okay? The Olympic Games, the Greeks date their calendar by the cycle of Olympic Games, right? And these ceremonies that turn into theater were more often than not part of those Olympic ceremonies. Everything I'm saying you should be writing down, because everything I'm saying is gonna be in the quiz. Okay. And now we come to the Golden Age of Greece. Sophocles, and you need to write these down. Sophocles, which is a PH, Sophocles, Sophocles. Aeschylus, which just like Asclepius, remember it's spelled the same way, A-E. Asclepius, of course, not to be confused, that's the god of medicine, god of healing. Aeschylus is a playwright, okay? And you can spell it A-E or just E, and then the K is C-H. So A-E-S-C-H-I-L-O-S, Aeschylus, okay? Aeschylus, Sophocles, and let me check, there was something else. Okay. Now, in that period in ancient Greece, so again, we're talking about ancient Greece, not to be confused with Rome. We're going back further, because Rome, at this point, the Golden Age of Greece, the 5th century BC, Rome is just a tribal settlement. This is long before Rome has the sophistication of the Republic and the Empire, okay? So it's not the same thing, but it's that wonderful, powerful civilization, which is so fundamental to our own as a root in Greece, of course, is going to expand outwards and be deeply influential, okay? The actors now, when they're actually performing their shows, which are mostly based on myths, mythological stories, right? Oedipus, if you've heard, everybody knows about Oedipus because of the Freudian theory, the Oedipus complex, which is, completely, not relevant in any way to what I'm saying, but everybody knows the word Oedipus, who in fact is in a tragedy, right? He unknowingly kills, or unknowingly sleeps with his mother and unknowingly kills his father. Freud, of course, said, the Oedipus complex was a child who wants to sleep with his mother and wants to kill his father. But Oedipus did those horrible things, but he didn't know who these people were. So it's a stretch, to say the least, in my humble opinion. Of course, I'm not a psychiatrist, but that's my humble opinion, that it's a bit of a stretch. But anyway, that's a brief synopsis of a famous tragedy of ancient Greece, and so many of them are based on mythological stories from those heroes and so on, right? They wore very large masks, men playing women, men and women alike, and very large clothes. So they're bigger than life, right? And you can go online, or if you're fortunate enough to visit Greece, the formerly Greek world, such as in Turkey, these magnificent, massive amphitheaters built into the sides of hills, right? So why do you think they'd want to wear big masks and big clothes?
So you can see it from a distance.
Huh?
So you can see it from a distance.
Yeah, well, that would be a practical reason, so people can be seen from a distance, absolutely. And of course, the idea that they're totally inhabiting they're not being themselves, right? In ancient Rome, there are countless examples of images of masked actors, right? And this is the kind of thing that I expect you to look up and find images of. All you have to download is acting in ancient Rome, Roman masks, Roman acting, drama in ancient Rome. Any of those things, you'll get a mountain of images, and you'll see all kinds of strange masks. Obviously, real masks, which were generally made of wood and painted and things like that, as far as I know, there are none that survive, but there are countless examples of painted ones on vases, countless examples of sculpted ones that decorated the theaters, and many of them some of them we'll see when we visit the Vatican Museum. So there are plenty of examples. Okay? A couple last things to finish up regarding that Greek world. These dramatic representations were managed by the state, so they were sanctioned by the state. That's important, right? And what else did I want to say about that? Anything else? Oh yeah, in ancient Greece, actors were privileged and they had high status. Okay. Now we come to Rome, and of course now we're centuries later, the 2nd century BC, 3rd century, 2nd century, 1st century BC, which is when theater comes to Rome, when Rome has become an established, important local power, regional and beyond. Right? By the 2nd century BC, Rome is importing Greek slaves, Greek doctors, Greek art, and building based on those kinds of traditions from Greece. Right? And the origins of theater in Rome, everything I've told you is a big part of it, but there's another aspect, and I think this would be equally true for Greece. The Roman world and the Etruscan world, and it's important to write down this word Etruscan because it comes up a lot in what is specifically the Archaic period, because the Etruscan civilization is an enormous influence. It combines with Rome. The earliest art, architecture that's more local to Italy is Etruscan. So you need to write down the word Etruscan, Etruscan, italic, meaning just like we say the word italics, but italic meaning of the Italian peninsula, and archaic, Archaic. So archaic would be 6th century BC and back. The Etruscan period is considered an archaic period, but it's an enormously advanced civilization of city-states. Tuscany comes from the word Etruscan, and the majority of the Etruscan settlements were there. And in that Etruscan world, among these others, there are shared sung poems, verse, right? And it's ribald, R-I-B-A-L-D, ribald. What that means is it's sexual in content, right? So these would be perhaps work songs or festival music, festival chanting. It could have been something that it had to do with the peasants. And who's closer to nature than the farmers, right? Now here you come to a fundamental element, the life that to our own day, there's really no difference in the sense that there's nothing without food, and food comes out of agriculture, and agriculture is about reproduction, the miracle of the seasons, the miracle of life, whether it's the animals reproducing, the earth coming back to life to provide food through tilling the soil as an act, as practically a sexual act, you could say, and the fertility of humanity, the miracle of the female giving birth, whether she's a human or a beast, right? So the fertility ritual is fundamental, and the sexuality of these chants and songs that are in the Etruscan culture and the Italic culture. Okay, so everything I'm saying is hugely important for the sources of what we're talking about, of drama and theater and so on. The idea of that agricultural world that it comes out of, the ritual of it, the music of it, and the reproductive aspect, the fertility aspect. So all those kinds of words that I'm using are key. So keep those in mind, okay? So, ritual, fecundity is another word, fertility, right? And now think about it. Throughout an important kind of drama, going back to Greece and then into Rome, and you can see countless examples in Shakespeare, because Shakespeare copied all these people, is what happens. There's a boy in love with a girl, and there's all kinds of obstacles. The father is jealous, somebody's getting away. Typically in ancient Rome, the girl in this kind of plot was a slave, so unacceptable to the family of the boy. Think of Romeo and Juliet as a great example in Shakespeare, where the two warring families. But what's the happy ending? Of course, leaving aside Romeo and Juliet, because that's obviously a tragedy, they both die. But in countless plays of Shakespeare that are comedies, and this goes back to another, the last of the Greek writers that I'll mention, Aristophanes. You need to write this down. Aristophanes is full of comedy and romance, and the F is PH. Aristophanes, okay? Aristophanes, okay? What happens at the end of those countless plays, or you know, if you've ever seen any of Shakespeare's light things like Much Ado About Nothing or As You Like It, or any of those things, what happens at the end after all of the travails of this boy and girl? What do you think happens, even if you've never seen one? What's a happy ending for the boy and the girl? Marriage, getting together. Why does the man and woman need to get together? What's the result? What happens when they get together? You're all examples of it, including myself. Babies, fertility, the renewal of life, reproduction, hope for the future. So if you think about it, every happy ending where the boy and girl get together to our own time, even if it's some like romantic comedy, it's a fertility ritual. It's all about going through the various travails and overcoming the obstacles to come together. Why does the man and woman come together? To mate, to procreate, to further the species, to live, like literally like a capital L, to live, to produce life, the miracle of life. So I hope this is clear to you. It just seems so interesting to me, this kind of theme that's running through everything that we're talking about, going back to, you know, these choruses and these religious ceremonies beyond our own imagining, you know, to archaic times, all the way to the reenactments in the movies that we see. It's a fertility ritual. I think that's you know, obviously we're being very reductive, and you know, there's always exceptions to everything, but generally speaking, I certainly think there's some truth to it. Okay, and so of course, you know, regarding Shakespeare, just as a parenthesis, Shakespeare, of course, he was immersed in all that stuff. Now, specifically, the playwrights I mentioned up to now were Greek. The Roman playwrights that have survived are from the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC. So they were performed here, but after their death, the Theater of Marcellus. Plautus and Terence. You have to write those names down. Terence is easy, T-E-R-E-N-C-E. Plautus is P-L-A-U-T-U-S. Plautus and Terence. Okay. They are the primary playwrights. And generally speaking, their plays are full of exactly these kinds of plots, making fun of the various stereotyped roles, the father of the house, the mother of the house, the lovesick son, the slave girl, the cook, the maid, the mooch is a big role in these plays. The moocher, some kind of guy, they call him the parasite, but I think moocher sounds better. Somebody who's always showing up for a free meal, right? Somebody who's always trying to get something for nothing. So all of those, what are called stock characters, it was filled with this. Another element of the drama of these times is pantomime. Pantomime, the greatest example that we can know is, of course, Charlie Chaplin. And everybody's heard of Charlie Chaplin. I mean, he was the consummate pantomime, a physical actor and generally comedian, but it didn't necessarily have to be comedy. So pantomime was another kind of theater. And think about how the world of Rome changes, right? When Plautus and Terence were having their plays performed, Rome was a relatively austere warrior state, right? And these were frivolous enjoyments that were looked down upon. Totally frivolous. That's an important word. Frivolous. It's important. I think it's relevant to our own world. Separating the serious from the frivolous is a good exercise, right? In observing society, I think you could say. So, theaters would never have been acceptable as permanent buildings. The theaters were, at best, temporary structures, or maybe just, again, like I described, like a wagon pulling up, or people gathering in a space, right? And they were very low, very rude and low kind of comedy for the masses, right? So we know a lot of everything that I'm saying is based on generally it's based on what the writers, the surviving literature from ancient Rome reports, and people complaining about how immoral it was or how base it was, and it was just very sexual and obnoxious. It would be like I don't know, just think of the most obnoxious sensationalist stuff that today it's all on the internet, right, mostly, and all just the really obnoxious, highly sexualized, blatant, no sophistication, no soul, whatever, right? No intentionality, no seriousness, but everybody enjoys it, so it's a sure thing, getting a full house, right? So that was the common aspect. So those kinds of very simplistic plays that have their roots in fertility, the pantomiming, and music. Musical accompaniment was obviously an enormous part of life in Rome. Musical accompaniment was constant throughout these things. And again, we've seen music has a religious role going back through the centuries. Okay. The last thing I'll say about the plots is that's just interesting, I just omitted it earlier, is that the slaves and the servants are usually the smart ones, and they're the ones that are planning and scheming, like, for example, to help the boy get the girl, or to stop the bad guy, or whatever it is. It's usually, and again, you see that in Shakespeare going all the way forward, okay? Now, we also have descriptions of what these theaters were like, going to the theater, okay? So now we're, by the time we get to a period when the theaters are being built, it's a very different Rome. It's not the hardy, soldier farmers. It's a city where a lot of wealth is coming in, the concentration of wealth. It's always a very hierarchical society, but you have masses of people, you have a mob, you could say, the various classes, and there's less of that moral certainty and certitude, and the frivolous is becoming more predominant, right? And now, what would have been unthinkable 2 centuries before, now in the 1st century BC, under Augustus, that theater is built, as well as the Theater of Pompey, right? And the Theater of Pompey, I mentioned this in a previous lesson, the excuse he managed to build it was he put a temple at the top, as if the seats of the amphitheater were steps to walk up to the top of the temple. So he made a fake, almost the temple was real, but it was almost it was an excuse to be able to build a theater, right? And these theaters were enormously crowded. The descriptions that come down to us tell us that people got up early in the morning. It was during the day, and it was all day trying to get a good seat, so people came early. They had a a ticket in the form of like a carved piece of bone, a kind of a token, something like that. This also controlled the crowd, so because if you had drunks or troublemakers or thieves who were, ultimately people would know not to let them in, so you could control the crowd to some degree. The Romans, in a crowded all-day setting like that, I don't think it's reported by some of these writers that it was smelly, that it was dirty, and we know again from these reports that it was a practice in the Colosseum, in the theaters, to spray the crowds with scented rose water, right? So to make everything smell nice, at least for a little while. By the time we come to that theater, there's all kinds of stagecraft. So now you have colored awnings that are raised up to protect everyone from the sun. That creates rich colors within that space. There's levers, pulleys, fountains, revolving stages, things like that. Okay. This is also true for the Colosseum. So now this is a more general description of entertainments, whether it's gladiator games at the Colosseum or theatrical performances or anything like this. And you had what were kind of considered entertainment districts. So as I've said, I think I said it previously last week, the Theater Marcellus, next to that was the circus, the Flaminian Circus. This is true for other theaters. They were near other entertainment venues, right? So by the time of the Roman Empire, this is sophisticated stagecraft. The people who paid, it was managed by magistrates, right? There was a government intervention, government support, or government censor, right? So that's important. They were managed by magistrates, which have political power. And some themes were simply unacceptable. I've described all of these kinds of plots. One thing that would not be allowed in Rome, as opposed to other cultures, was to minimally imply that any a woman of rank was not virtuous. It would simply non-existent that there would be a lady of the house or any character like that would be a liar or betray her husband. The men can go womanized, but the idea that a woman would be shown doing anything like that was simply unacceptable. It would not be shown, right? So of course there are moral requisites to the theater on that level. Now, let's say you're a aspiring politician. What way can you promote your name? You put on a good show. You pay for theatrical performances, or you pay for gladiator games or anything like that. So they were generally paid for by patrons that could be politicians or people of rank who are either growing in they're reinforcing their popularity, or they're trying to gain popularity for elections and things like that. And a difference between theater and gladiator games is actors don't have to be replaced after every match. The gladiators tend to get killed off, right? So paying for a theatrical performance is a bit cheaper. Even at the theater of the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire, which is far from the roots I've described of that archaic period, they still began with ritual processions and sometimes a sacrifice as well. So that religious aspect of the gathering is there as well. So I think that's about it. So that's the overall story that I wanted you to understand regarding this aspect of life in ancient Rome. And we see the venues that were used. Okay. Do you have any questions right now about anything? All right. Okay, everybody ready? So now we've come to the top of the Capitoline Hill. Okay. Now I did most of this lecture in the Campidoglio section on Monday. We're in a different spot today, so we'll see if at a certain point we'll just see how useful it is for me to perhaps stop at a certain point and then continue over there or not. So we'll just see how I. Uh-oh. Okay, so the reason I stopped here is because I want to show you this behind me here. And this is there's some technical terms. This is a little note taking regarding architectural terms, and it's just a good example. Okay, so I want to tell you a couple things about it. As you see, it's a kind of a recreation of a little temple. It's actually from the early 1800s, so obviously it's not an original temple of ancient Rome. It's just a small building. I think, you know, it's hard to say what it was used for. Perhaps it was even a religious chapel, because a couple centuries ago, or actually until the late 1800s, this was a hospital, and it was a German hospital, and that was a German Cultural Institute. The German embassy was up here. There was a whole kind of a German colony, but with World War I and Germany's loss, the buildings were taken away from them. So that's the spoils of war. So it's kind of a miniature temple. Now, I mentioned this term the first lesson when we were talking about St. Pietro and Montorio, the triangular portion at the top of a temple or of a church. Anybody remember what that term was? Huh? Timpani, tympanum or timpani. That's exactly it. Yeah. So now within it we see some material, some sculptures, baked clay. What's that term? Remember it now? Terracotta. Those are obviously terracotta. Now the style of these is classical, so not to be confused, as we said, with the Oriental Etruscan style that we haven't seen examples of. You can see right away from these divinities. And the one in the middle, the woman, is probably Athena or / Minerva, with military garb, a goddess of, not exactly a goddess of war, but, you know, I guess you could say a goddess of a fighter for sure, and a goddess of wisdom. And the one on the right that's sitting down, you see it's a male figure with a big beard. That's a divinity that represents a river. So you could say that that's a Numen. So that type, a large figure with a beard that's reclining like he, represents a river. What's the famous river in Rome? Tiber, the Tiber. And in fact, if you look carefully at the very further right, what can you see next to the river god? It's not a dog. It's the she-wolf. Do you see the two children? It's Romulus and Remus. It's Romulus and Remus with the she-wolf. So that's how we know it represents Rome, it represents the Tiber, and he's also holding something. It's not so easy to see. That's what's called a horn of plenty, a kind of a horn-shaped basket full of fruit and vegetables. Because what does water give us? Water gives us life, agriculture. So the river is a source of life, and he's powerful. Rivers are also powerful. They can also be dangerous. So he has this powerful, muscular, masculine quality, really for that reason. Okay. And on the left, I don't know who that divinity is supposed to be, but you could see a little recreation of a temple. So it's probably supposed to be perhaps the representative of the Capitoline Hill with the Temple of Jupiter on top, maybe. Now here's, again, the other reason I stopped here is because of the terminology. These figures are not three-dimensional. You can only see them frontally, right? But they stick out a bit. And this is called relief, which is exactly the word, just like Tylenol spells relief. A relief means at least, you know, a three-dimensional figure, but that's meant to be seen frontally. So you'll find countless examples of coffins, sarcophagi from ancient Rome that are with lots of sculpted reliefs, meaning they have panels that are sculpted. So a relief is generally a sculpted panel, right? Now, you can have high relief and low relief. A high relief would mean one where the sculptures stick out a lot. Low relief is when they're much much more narrow, much less sticking out. So that's high and low relief sculptures, right? As opposed to 360 degrees, such as Michelangelo's David or something that's meant to be seen from every point of view. So that's what a relief is. It's important to know that, because now you can say within the timpani of this structure there are high reliefs of divinities. So all of a sudden you've got the vocabulary to describe what you're looking at. That's why this is useful, right? What's holding up the timpani or the tympanum? These are not columns, because columns are like trees. They're freestanding, right? These are in relief, you could say, and they're called pilasters. So these are pilasters. You could call them columns, I suppose. Columns in relief, square, but pilasters separates it a bit. So pilaster, okay? So you have the pilasters holding up the timpani. Within the timpani are the terracotta reliefs. So all of a sudden, these 5 or 6 various vocabulary terms have given you the ability to describe what you're looking at, and that's the point. Okay? So I'll stop there regarding that description.